It's natural gas in the basement for heat and hot water.
Okay.
So that's our largest source of carbon. That's our biggest problem.
I thought natural gas was clean burning energy.
Well, you know, it was compared to coal.
Okay, but that's still not good enough.
But it's not good enough.
Okay.
Okay, so I recently moved from a hybrid electric-powered and gas-powered home, where gas did our hot water and our stove and oven, into an all-electric place. And here's what happened. The oven doesn't work very well. The stove works incredibly well because it's induction. The hot water heaters, it's kind of okay. Our electric bill is huge, but we got no gas bill. Our electric bill is so much now. It's more than it was before with gas added.
Right. Well, you know, there are artificial incentives built in the system for natural gas, and those are starting to be addressed. For example, in New York State, if you're within 100 feet of a gas line, you can demand to have service, and everybody pays for that.
Wow.
And so we have to get to where electricity has the true price and gas has the true price, and so those two can compete. And over time, you know, with conflicts around the world and where we see climate policies going, there's going to be a carbon price built into natural gas.
Okay.
Well, how do we most efficiently electrify a building?
Right. Well, we do it by installing heat pumps for heat and hot water, and that's the main way to do it. In New York, like I said, our problem isn't lighting. Our problem is the heating and hot water. Then, of course, you need the grid to green at the same time, and that's happening as well.
Is an electric-powered hot water heater more or less efficient than a gas-powered hot water heater? Same with like a dryer, for example, because you can get a dryer that's has a gas-heated element, but in these newer buildings where they don't allow gas, you're stuck with electric. Is it as efficient?
Right, and they're getting efficient for sure, and they're getting to parity.
The heat pump works really well.
The heat pump is very efficient. It can be way more efficient than the natural gas boiler or furnace that you already have.
What about when it comes to the other appliances, though?
They're getting there, and you know,
but not yet.
Hot water. No, there are hot water systems that are there.
Okay.
And we need more technology to come on board when it comes to hot water, particularly to scale across all the different type of building types and cities. But you know, we have the largest decarbonization market in the world now in New York City, and that's going to spur innovation to help serve this market.
The thing that's a challenge to me when thinking about this, and look, no question, I want to do what's right for the environment, what's right for the world. Where's this power being generated? Because it's not being generated at Indian Point anymore. That's shut down, so it's not nuclear. Here in New York City, we're still relying on a lot of dirty sources to power. So whether or not we're heating with gas or electricity, net doesn't really matter if that electricity is generated by a dirty source.
It does, because today's heat pumps are so more energy efficient that you're just using less energy, which means you're using less carbon, and it almost doesn't matter what the grid is, right? But at that same time, the grid is greening in New York, right? We did lose Indian Point. That was about a third of our power in New York City that was fossil fuel free. That's being replaced by hydropower and renewable power that's coming in as soon as 2026. So the grid is greening, and that's going to help when we start to plug more things into that grid.
Is the grid, because I read the book, The Grid. There is a book out there, and I have John Tucker reading it now, and it talks about the history of electricity in this country, which is fascinating. I look like a geek sitting on the Jersey Shore 2 summers ago.
I feel like I got to read that. I got to read this book.
It's no way to pick up girls, I think, reading the book about the grid. You know, can our grid today handle increased electrical demand?
It can for heating, right? Okay. So our organization modeled all 1 million buildings in New York City against the local Con Edison grid. What we found is there's a 42% headroom in the winter to plug things into the grid. So said a different way, our grid is built out for the hottest day of the year, right? And when we turn those air conditioners off, 42% of our grid goes dormant. It's actually a very inefficient use of assets. So there's 42% room to plug stuff into the grid because our heating source is not electrical based today, it's fossil fuel based.
So what would you say is the biggest thing holding us back when it comes to wide scale adoption of more electricity and less gas? Is it because these legacy systems are going to take so long to replace?
It's that. We have laws now in New York State and New York City, and actually about 100 jurisdictions around the country that are forcing the transition.
So what that does is it tells developers, okay, if you're going to build this, you can't include a gas line here. It has to be all electric, right?
Correct. So in New York City, starting this year, buildings under 7 floors, new buildings, have to be all electric. And then in 27, all new construction needs to be all electric in New York City.
I've talked to developers who say, okay, the regulations are not there yet, but it is such a pain for us to deal with gas these days that we're just going all electric.
And so what are the incentives today for, like, I'm just thinking of Jamie Dimon building that new building on Park Avenue. I mean, talk about going to be state of the art when it's finished. I'm guessing he's going to hang all the plaques how it's this compliant and that compliant, and we won this award and we're triple green this. What's a new building like that today? What are they trying to do for their energy?
Well, sure, but there's the heart of your question on incentives. There are way more incentives now than there's ever been in the history of this issue, right? Primarily from the federal government through the Inflation Reduction Act, but also by states around the country that are, putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to public policies.
Are you optimistic about the greenification of the grid? Like, is this something, we talk about offshore wind, for example. Look at all the politics around that, and look at all the issues it faces. We just talked last week to Will Wade, one of our reporters here, who wrote about nuclear power plants around the country that are coming back online potentially because they turned those things off and they were like, oh, wait a second, this was actually a green source of power. Indian Point, not one of them, because they're dismantling it. Is the timeline here realistic?
I think it is. Look at, offshore wind went live at the end of last year off of Long Island for a part of Long Island. There's 2 big mega projects for offshore wind. We're getting Canadian hydropower in. There's upstate New York excess renewable power. We actually have a bottleneck, and we're building transmission lines to get that into New York City. So I'm confident that the grid is going to green. The impetus is there.
Is that a state or is it a federal mandate? Because I could see this breaking on political lines, red states maybe being more open to green, so on and so forth.
Yeah, sure, it does fall along political lines, but the renewable energy that's happening in New York is state-driven. The offshore wind is controlled by the federal government, but those were cited years and years ago, and so those projects are moving forward.
What about solar and solar efficiency? I talked to some neighbors who are like, okay, we want to do solar, but the payoff it's a very expensive capital expense. Financing's really high now because of rates. And they're like, it pays off in like 12 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, it is, but we need all of the above, right? And so the issue in big cities is we just don't have a lot of place to put solar panels, right? And so offshore wind is going to be the future of renewable power, and that's where you see the projects going.